Hi friends, my name is Nataraj. In this video, I am going to talk about the most important, quite regularly used concept of JEE programming, that is how to develop Java web application having servlet component as the web component. So in a way I can say developing Java first web application. So before that, let me prepare some background here. First of all, I must say what is web application. A web application is collection of web components having capability to generate web pages. There are two types of web components: static web components, B, dynamic web components. Static web components means they generate static web pages. What do you mean by static web page? You give 1000 requests to that web page, content of the web page will not change. That's why it is called what? Static web page. Static web components generate static web pages, and example is HTML files. HTML files. That means all HTML files comes under static web pages. Dynamic web component, they generate dynamic web pages. If the content of the web page is changing either based on what? Input value of the request or time of the request. Either based on input value of the request or what? Time of the request. Then it is called as what? Dynamic web page. So generally servlet component, JSP components, all this comes under what? Dynamic web components. So what are the examples here? Servlet components, JSP components, ASP.NET components, PHP components. All these comes under what here? Dynamic web components. Static web components, dynamic web components. HTML files comes under static web components. And when it comes to what? Servlet, JSP, ASP.NET, PHP, all this comes under what? Come on here. Dynamic web components. So today our basic requirement is how to develop a Java web application having servlet component as the web component. Servlet component means dynamic web component. Dynamic web component generates what? Dynamic web page. So ultimately I want to see dynamic web page, okay, in my website or in my web application. So this is the requirement. Let me put my requirement in the form of diagram notation. So here we have a browser as usually. Here we are having what? Web server oblique application server. Yeah, because we know that to execute web application we need what? Web server or application server. Okay, application server is extension of what? Web server. Tomcat web server, Resin web server, but WebLogic, WebSphere, all these are called what? Application servers. So if web server is not there, okay, no one will be there taking request and delivering response from the browser. No one will be there taking request from browser. No one will be there delivering response to browser. So that's why web server is required to manage and execute web components. To manage and execute web application and its what? Web components. Web servers provide necessary containers to execute certain web components. Actually, to execute servlet component, we need servlet container. To execute JSP component, we need what? JSP container kind of thing. Okay, JSP components indirectly takes the support of what? Servlet container for execution. In this process, okay, we get these containers in web server. So that's why web server is responsible to take the request, to deliver the response. At the same time, it also provides some containers who can execute certain web components dynamically. So if you take Java based web server like Tomcat, it supplies what? Two containers, one servlet container, one JSP container. Servlet container is responsible to execute servlet components. JSP container is responsible to execute what? JSP components. So without web server, we never expect the execution of what? Web components and web applications. Web application execution is nothing but web components execution. There is no separate execution for web application. So in this web server, I am going to deploy one web application. What is deployment, sir? The process of keeping developed web application in web server is called as what? Deployment. And removing same thing from web server is called undeployment. So this is my date app. Yes. So what is this web application? Nice. In that we have a web component. What is that web component? Date servlet. That means I am taking this web application just having only one web component, that is what? Date servlet. Okay. That means in my website only one web component is there, and that one web component generates one web page. What is that web page? It's a servlet based web page, na? That's why dynamic web page. That's nice. How the flow happens? In the browser address bar we type URL. Because of that URL, request will be generated. Generated request will go to what? Web component. Not directly, definitely through servlet container. So there some execution takes place. Generated output goes to what? Web server. Not directly, definitely through what? Web server. Not directly, definitely through what? Servlet container, it goes to web server. This web server sends that output to what? Browser. And browser displays that output in the form of what? Web page. And whether it is static web page or dynamic web page or servlet generated web page, no, generally it will be what? Dynamic web page. Here, what is that you want to display? I want to display date and time. Current date and time I want to display. For example, November 17, 2016, and the time is something like 9:30 a.m. How can you say this page is dynamic web page? Suppose if I give request at 10 o'clock, it will give me dynamic web page having date and time of the 10 o'clock. If I give request at 12 o'clock, it will give me dynamic web page having date and time of what? The 12 o'clock. That means the content of the web page is changing dynamically according to the time of request generation. That's why I don't mind calling this web page as what? Dynamic web page. Let me explain the flow one more time. This is number 1, which talks about what? Request. This is number 2. Web server takes a request and passes to servlet component, requested servlet component by using servlet container support. Servlet container executes servlet component. In this process, request processing logic executes and output will be generated. The generated output definitely goes to whom? Web server through servlet container. That web server sends the output to what? Browser. And browser takes that output and displays in the form of what? Web page. Since web page contains dynamic content, we don't mind calling that web page as what? Dynamic web page. So this is the application which I would like to develop. So overall conclusion is, I'm going to deploy in what? Web server. What is the one I am going to deploy? Web application. What is the name of the web application? Date app. In that one, how many web components you want to take? Only one web component. What is that? Date servlet. What it will do? Generates one dynamic web page having what? Date and time. Since date and time will change based on the time of request generation, we call that web page as what? Dynamic web page. Right. So let me talk about steps of developing this application. Keep the following software setup ready. JDK 1.7 or 1.8. I have Tomcat 8 or Tomcat 9. I think in my machine I have Java 8 and Tomcat 9. And right now I am not interested to use Eclipse. In the coming videos, I'll show how to work with Eclipse. Right now, for developing application, I would like to take the support of Edit Plus as my editor. Edit Plus as my editor. These three things are enough. Tomcat is my web server. Okay. JDK is required for compilation of servlet component, and Edit Plus I am going to use only for what? Development of the web components. So number B, create deployment directory structure. Deployment directory structure for web application. What is deployment directory structure? First of all, tell me who has to execute our web application, web server. While developing web application, we have to pack the web components. We need to pack the web components as needed for the web server. But good news is, this packing mechanism, nothing but deployment directory structure of web application, is not specific to one server. It's common for all servers. In fact, this directory structure designing is given by Sun Microsystem as part of servlet specification. And all other vendor companies who are creating web application based on that packing mechanism, yes, following that directory structure. Simply following that directory structure, no other second thought. So that's the reason we can say Java web applications are what? Vada application. Because directory structure are the web components that we develop in the web application, like servlet, JSP components, HTML component, not specific to any server. They are common for all the servers. Once you develop web application for any server, okay, you can happily deploy and execute same application in other servers without having any second thought. This is the reason we don't mind web applications are portable across the multiple servers, or we don't mind saying web applications are what? Server independent applications. What applications here? Server independent application. Nothing but Vada application. Write once, deploy anywhere. What is deployment directory structure? It talks about packing mechanism of the various web components into web application. When directory structure is there, according to directory structure, you should start arranging what? Web components. Sir, I don't want to follow. If you don't want to follow, that's your problem, because web server recognizes web application and web components only when they are supplied in a particular order. You cannot follow your choice order. For example, you have applied for a seat in the foreign university. That university said that you put your documents in 4 color envelopes, 4 types of documents in 4 different types of envelopes or 4 different colors envelopes, and keep those 4 small envelopes in a big envelope having color white. You like it or not like it, you will be forced to follow their instruction in order to what? Pack the profile of yours to submit to the university. Otherwise, university rejects it. For example, they said, take a big envelope, in that one keep 4 small envelopes. Okay, first envelope color should be red, having your what? Academic certificate Xerox copies. Second envelope should be what? Green color, having some other documents like your identity proof kind of documents. Third one should be yellow, having your bank statement. Fourth one will be what? White, having some other color. Others having some other documents. If you liked it or not liked it, you have to follow that process. But here also, packing mechanism is not your choice. Even though your components, your web application, but you have to pack web components into web application as required for what? Servers. As required for what? Containers. Luckily, but this directory structure is not specific to one server. Common for what? All servers. Anywhere you can create. It's not compulsory you should create in certain folder. Anywhere you can create. I'm starting this directory structure in E drive. The folder name is datapp. In this folder, I'm taking what? One folder. What folder? WebINF folder. Under this WebINF folder, there will be one folder called classes folder. Under this web.inf, we have one more folder called web.xml. Fixed one. You cannot take other name for web.xml. Under this classes folder, generally we will place our servlet component. What is our servlet component? Date servlet.java. In this date servlet.java, after compilation, we will get .class file in a package. We should always generate classes having packages. You should not take classes without what? Packages. com.nt.what? Servlet. Under this, we will be having .class file. What is the .class file? Date servlet.class. See boss, taking class with a package is a industry standard, and generally we take those package name in a convention. E drive under this date.app folder, under this web.inf is fixed and uppercase, it's not underscore, web-inf. Web.xml file name is fixed, classes folder is fixed, and this is .java file of servlet component. Any file name you can take. And I'm assuming this is the package. In this package, this .class file should come. At the time of development of servlet component, this package and .class file will not come. When we compile our .java file, this .class file will be generated. So we have to follow some conventions while taking the package name. Generally, people follows commercial means com, open source means org. Then we write either project name or company name. Second word is what? Project name or company name. Right now I am writing company name. Then we write either module name or purpose name. Module name or what? Purpose name. So right now we are not developing serious project. That's why I am not typing any what? Module name. I am just typing what here? Category name or purpose name. Right now it is a servlet component, that's why I am taking what? Servlet. Observe, all predefined classes are given in a package. No predefined class is there without package. That's why you should also take class with packages. Taking class without package is not a industry standard. So com for commercial, NT for Naresh Technologies, servlet is what? Right now I am placing one servlet component, that's why I have taken servlet as the package name. So it depends on the situation, we can take the various words in the package, but you have to take package with some convention. And you have to take class always in a package, whether it's user defined one or predefined one. Always take class in a package. So this date.app folder is called as web root folder. C drive, root folder for entire drive. D drive, root folder for entire D drive. Okay, next E colon, root folder for entire E drive. Similarly, this is the root folder for entire application. Now onwards, if I say application, web application, I have to refer from date.app. Since it is acting as base folder or root folder for entire application, I don't mind calling it as what? Web root folder. What folder? Web root. Root for entire web application. Moreover, whenever we want to deploy the web application, we deploy this date.app folder only. With this name only web application will be identified. After deployment, this name becomes name of the web application, identification name for the web application. Entire hierarchy of web application starts with this folder, that's why web root folder. Number two, this folder is what? Becomes name of the web application. This folder becomes what? Name of the web application. That's why it is called as what? Web root folder. What folder here? Web root folder. So what about web.xml and all these things? Yes, I will explain one by one. Okay. So first let's concentrate on why this web.inf folder is given. Web.inf folder is what? Logical partition within the web application. What is that? Logical partition. It is useful, okay, it is useful to separate web components in the web application. Some web components we place before web.inf folder. Some web components we place after web.inf folder. That means inside web.inf folder. Some web components we place outside web.inf folder. This is useful to separate them. Generally, Java classes, like servlet components will be placed inside webinf/classes folder. HTML file, JSP pages, images, audio files, video files, CSS files, those things will be placed outside webinf folder. That means here webinf folder is acting as what? Logical partition between web components of the web application. When I give this application to server, the servlet container or some other container looks for all servlet component Java classes inside webinf and classes folder. It looks for images, audio files, video file, HTML file, this kind of things outside webinf folder. So that's why webinf folder acts as a logical partition in the web application. Some web components inside webinf folder, some web components we place what? Outside webinf folder. So for the timing you remember, in the entire web application, okay, webinf acts as a partition to separate the web components. Even containers are mentally prepared for that. Whenever we give request to .html file, container never looks for .html file inside webinf. It starts identifying and locating .html file outside webinf folder only. Definitely what? Outside webinf folder. But when it comes to servlet component, whenever we give request to servlet component, container looks to locate and execute servlet component by searching in what? Inside webinf, by simply searching inside what? Webinf folder. Okay, let's go for development of the servlet component. Develop the servlet component. Nothing but date servlet. What I want to develop is what? Date servlet. Let's see how to develop this what? Date servlet component. I'm taking edit plus support here to develop this component. So this is my edit plus editor. Here I want to develop my servlet. If not interested, you may take other editors also. That's not an issue. Any editor you can take. So what is the servlet I want to develop here? Date servlet I want to develop. So as I said, a good practice is what? Keeping class in a package. Already we decided to take what package? com.nt.servlet. So taking a class, maybe user defined, maybe third party, or maybe predefined. Taking class without package is not a good practice. That's why you observe all predefined classes are given in one or other package. Then I want to import various packages that I am going to use. Actually, a good practice, you should not import packages before writing the code. You start writing the code, you start utilizing various APIs, various classes, various packages, and accordingly you start importing the packages. Accordingly, you please start importing the packages. So that's why before writing code, don't write a package import statement. I'll give one small example. You have gone to interview. Interviewer asked you question. Can you write the sample code on this concept? So you started writing that sample code, porting packages first, then you are writing code. So it does not take much time that you have mugged up the code. So that's why what is the good practice? First write the code based on the classes, packages, interfaces you used belonging to various packages. Okay, just start importing the packages by just going to the top of the code. By just going to the top of the code. That's always good practice. So I want to follow that standard. That's why I'm taking my class as what? Public class date servlet extends generic servlet. Yeah, first application, I want to extend from generic servlet. You know that there are three ways of developing servlet. Number one, take a class, implement what? javax.servlet.servlet interface. But that's not recommended. Why here? 5 methods are there. If you are interested or not interested, all the methods of that servlet interface, all the 5 methods of that servlet interface should be implemented even though you are interested or not interested. That's a problem number one. Number two is extending from generic servlet. Generic servlet actually internally implements what? Servlet interface, and out of 5 methods it will provide definition for 4 methods. Only one method it does not provide implementation is service method. So that means when you extend from generic servlet class, you need not to worry about all the methods to implement. You have to just implement only one method, that is what? Service method. So that too my class is extending from what? Generic servlet. But the problem is working with generic servlet is having one problem. We cannot use protocol HTTP standards. We cannot use protocol HTTP features. So that's why we go for third option. What is that here? We take a class extending from what? HTTP servlet class. So when you go for this class, we can happily work with what? Protocol HTTP standards. Entire industry prefers developing servlet by extending from what? HTTP servlet. But since it is the first application, that too I am not using what? Any protocol HTTP features. That's why I preferred developing my class extending from what? Generic servlet. We can work with protocol HTTP, but we cannot use features that are there in protocol HTTP. Even though servlet component class is extending from generic servlet, we can still work with what? Protocol HTTP to generate the request to gather a response. But the thing is, we cannot use protocol HTTP features, specific features, special features like auto refresh. Refreshing the page automatically at regular intervals. You observe a website that shows live game score. So the content of the web page will be refreshed or reloaded automatically at what? Regular intervals. Automatically at what? Regular intervals. Such kind of facilities we cannot use. Otherwise, even though class is extending from generic servlet class, happily it can take HTTP request, happily it can generate what? HTTP response. That means it can work with protocol HTTP, but we cannot enjoy special features that are there in what? Protocol HTTP. So public class date servlet extends what? Generic servlet. Yeah, we must take this class as what? Public class. Why, sir? You know that servlet container is responsible to load our servlet class, to instantiate our servlet class, to call various methods on the object of our servlet class. In fact, servlet container take care of whole life cycle of our servlet component. Whole life cycle of our servlet component. When it is taking care of the whole life cycle of our servlet component, first of all, we should make our class visible to servlet container. And our class is there in our own package, com.nt.servlet package. But servlet container is there somewhere else. Servlet container is there somewhere in the server. So to make our class visible to servlet container, our class must be taken as what? Public class. While developing other technology application, taking class as public or not, that is your choice. When it comes to servlet programming, we must take our class as what? Public class. We compulsory should take our class as what? Public class. So that's why point 1. What is this? Our servlet component class must be taken as public class in order to make our class, our servlet component class, loadable and instantiatable by servlet container. Simple theory. Our class is there in our package. Servlet container is there somewhere in the server. And servlet container is responsible to take care of whole life cycle of the servlet component, right from birth to death. To make our class visible to servlet container, loadable and instantiatable to by servlet container. So first of all, our class should be visible outside the package. Which classes are visible inside and outside the package? Public classes. That's why we must take our servlet component class as what? Public class. In this generic servlet, there is one method, service method, which is there as abstract method. And moreover, for every request, servlet container also calls a service method to execute our request processing logic and to generate the output. So that's why we must to implement, because in generic servlet, abstract method name is what? Service. So whenever you are developing subclass for abstract class, definitely we should provide definition for what? That abstract method. So what is this? Public void service. Servlet request REQ, servlet response RES, throws servlet exception comma IO exception. Container gives two parameters, okay, in the service method. One is request, one is response. That means service method is actually containing two parameters. One is request, one is response. This REQ represents request object. RES represents what? Response object. Using this request object, we can gather entire inputs that are coming along with the request. Using this response object, you have to gather, you can deliver response to the browser by taking the support of other components. That means with the support of request object, we can gather lot of inputs that are coming along with the request, and you can use them while writing request processing logic in the service method. We can take the support of response object to deliver generated output of service method to browser as what? Response. We never create request and response object, container only creates them. We never call this service method, container only calls them. In fact, creating object for this servlet component class, calling service method on that object, the two having request and response objects argument, everything is taken care by whom? Servlet container. So what we do in the service method? See, servlet component generate dynamic web page. Dynamic web page means content will be varying content. Whatever logic is required to generate that varying content will be placed in this what? Service method. So generally, service method contains logic to process the request and to generate the response. Service method is most important one. For the time being, you may feel it is like main method of standalone application. Because we never call the service method. Container calls for every request. If you give 10 requests, yes, for all 10 requests, 10 times service method will be called. If you give 30 requests, for all 30 requests, service method will be called for what? 30 times. So how to write logic in service method and how to perform other steps that are there in our servlet component development, we'll discuss in the next video. For the time being, let me save this one by creating deployment directory structure practically. So here we have E drive. In this E drive, I am trying to create a folder called what? DateApp. Under DateApp, I will create one more folder, WebINF. Under WebINF, I will create one more folder called what? Classes. Under classes, I am saving this what? Date servlet. I am saving this date servlet. So just look at the deployment directory structure. We are just going according to the plan. We created E drive, DateApp, WebINF, classes. There I saved .java. After entire development, I will compile, then package and .class file will come. And later we have to develop this web.xml file. In the next video, I am going to talk about how to write code in what? Service method. What kind of logics we have to write in what? Service method. We will also write entire steps that are required to develop, deploy and execute the application.